He thought her job was a joke, a quaint little hobby she pursued while he conquered the corporate world. At a dinner with his closest friends, Mark didn't just mock his wife, Sarah. He belittled her, painting her as a naive dreamer in front of everyone who mattered to him. He basked in their sycophantic laughter, oblivious to the quiet storm gathering in her eyes. But the universe has a funny way of balancing the scales. The next morning, as Mark sat in a boardroom preening for his promotion, the door opened, and in walked his new CEO. In walked his wife. The clinking of wine glasses and the low hum of conversation at Veritas, a restaurant known more for its power broker clientele than its Michelin stars, was the perfect backdrop for Mark's casual cruelty. He held his glass of Cabernet Sauvignon aloft, a king addressing his court, which tonight consisted of his two closest friends, David and Thomas, and their respective partners, Jessica and Chloe. Opposite him, Sarah, his wife of 7 years, picked at her seared scallops, the vibrant saffron risotto beneath them, a stark contrast to the dull ache blooming in her chest. "No, seriously, Mark," said his voice, a little too loud, a little too slurred from the expensive wine. "You guys think you have it tough. You should hear about Sarah's big project." He made air quotes around the words, his lips curling into a smirk that she had once found charming, but now recognized as the precursor to a jibe at her expense. David, ever the sycophant, leaned in. "Oh yeah, what's the latest from the craft corner, Sarah?" he asked, a twinkle in his eye that mirrored Mark's. Sarah forced a tight-lipped smile. "It's actually going quite well, thank you, David. We just secured a new round of funding." Mark let out a bark of a laugh. "Funding? That's what she calls it." Her father, bless his cotton socks, probably got tired of her asking for a bigger allowance and decided to humor her. "It's a sustainable textiles company," he explained to the table, his tone dripping with condescension. She and her friend, another stay-at-home mum, are going to save the world one organic cotton tote bag at a time. The laughter that followed was a physical blow. It wasn't just Mark. It was the easy, unthinking cruelty of the people she had considered friends. Jessica, who worked in PR, offered a pitying smile. Chloe, a trust fund beneficiary who had never worked a day in her life, simply looked bored. Only Thomas had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable, shifting in his seat and taking a sudden, intense interest in his steak. "It's more than just tote bags." Mark Sarah said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. She refused to let him see how much his words cut her. "It's about creating a closed-loop system for textile recycling, reducing landfill waste, and providing ethical employment." She had practiced this pitch, honed it, delivered it to investors who saw the billion-dollar potential, not the quaint hobby Mark portrayed. The company wasn't some little side project. It was called Nexus Innovations, and it was her life's work. "Oh, ethical employment," Mark scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. "You pay a few women in a community center to sew your little bags, and suddenly you're a titan of industry. It's adorable, really." He turned to the others, his voice conspiratorial. "She comes home talking about supply chains and market disruption. It's like she's playing a game of business Barbie. Meanwhile, I'm at Sterling and Finch, closing 8-figure deals that actually matter." The name of his company, Sterling and Finch, was dropped with the casual arrogance of a man who defined himself by his employer. He was a senior vice president, a title he wore like a suit of armor, and he never missed an opportunity to remind everyone of his importance. He saw the world in a clear hierarchy, and in his mind he was at the apex while Sarah was somewhere near the bottom playing in her sandbox of eco-friendly fabrics. "That's not fair, Mark," Sarah said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous murmur. "You have no idea what I do." "Oh, I have an idea," he retorted, leaning across the table, his face flushed. "I have an idea that while I'm pulling all-nighters to keep this family in the lifestyle we enjoy, this dinner, this wine, your new car, you're playing with sewing machines and feeling good about yourself. It's a hobby, Sarah. A cute, expensive hobby. And that's fine. But don't pretend it's a real job." The finality in his tone, the utter dismissal of her passion and her hard work, was the deepest cut of all. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw a stranger. The man she had fallen in love with, the supportive partner who had once encouraged her dreams, was gone. In his place was a man bloated with his own success, a man who needed to diminish her to feel big. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of polite conversation that Sarah couldn't bring herself to join. She retreated into a shell of silence, the laughter and chatter around her fading into a dull roar. She felt a profound sense of loneliness, an isolation that was all the more acute for being in a crowded room. As they left the restaurant, Mark, buoyed by the wine and the adulation of his friends, draped an arm around her shoulders. "Don't be so sensitive, babe," he murmured, his breath hot on her ear. "I was just having a bit of fun. You know I'm proud of your little project." But his words were hollow, a flimsy bandage on a gaping wound, as the chauffeur-driven car whisked them through the glittering city streets. Sarah stared out at the passing lights, a cold resolve solidifying in her heart. He thought her job was a joke. He thought she was playing a game. He had no idea the game was about to change. And he had no idea that she was the one who had just rewritten the rules. The new round of funding she'd mentioned hadn't come from her father. It had come from a consortium of venture capitalists who saw in Nexus Innovations the future of an industry. And that was just the beginning. The drive home was a silent one, a stark contrast to the boisterous atmosphere of the restaurant. Mark, sated and self-satisfied, quickly drifted into a wine-induced doze, his head lolling against the cool leather of the town car's seat. Sarah, however, was wide awake, her mind a whirlwind of hurt anger and a steely determination that had been forged in the crucible of her husband's mockery. As the car pulled into the driveway of their sprawling suburban home, a testament to Mark's success at Sterling and Finch. Sarah didn't wait for the driver to open her door. She slipped out the cool night air, a welcome balm on her heated skin. Inside the house was quiet, the air still. It was a beautiful house filled with expensive art and designer furniture. But tonight it felt like a gilded cage. She walked past the living room with its oversized white sofas and abstract paintings and went straight to her home office. This was her sanctuary, the one room in the house that was truly hers. Unlike the rest of the home, which had been decorated by an interior designer to Mark's specifications, this room was a reflection of her own taste and passions. Books on sustainable business practices lined the shelves. Fabric samples in a rainbow of colors were pinned to a large corkboard, and in the center of the room was a large, sleek desk, her command center. She sat down and opened her laptop. The screen illuminated her face, casting a blue glow in the darkened room. For a few moments, she just stared at the screen, the cursor blinking expectantly. Then with a deep breath, she began to type. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, not with the frenetic energy of anger, but with the focused precision of a general planning a campaign. For the past 2 years, Sarah had been living a double life. To Mark and their social circle, she was the dutiful corporate wife with a quaint little eco-hobby. But in the world of sustainable technology and high-stakes finance, she was a force to be reckoned with. Nexus Innovations. The company she had co-founded with her friend Amelia was far from the community center project Mark had so contemptuously described. It had started small, it was true, with a simple idea to create a biodegradable fabric from agricultural waste. But Sarah, with her background in chemical engineering and her MBA from Stanford, credentials Mark conveniently forgot to mention when he was belittling her, had seen the bigger picture. She had developed a proprietary process to convert pineapple leaf fibers into a luxurious, silk-like material that was not only sustainable, but also incredibly durable. She and Amelia had bootstrapped the company, pouring their life savings into it. They had worked out of Sarah's garage, for the first year their hands stained with dyes, their nights filled with research and development. Sarah had been the silent architect of the company's growth, her quiet demeanor belying a fierce ambition and a brilliant strategic mind. She had navigated the complex world of patents, secured initial seed funding from angel investors who saw the potential she exuded, and built a small but dedicated team of engineers and designers. The new round of funding she had mentioned at dinner wasn't just a small injection of cash from her father. It was a $30 million Series B financing round led by Viridian Capital, one of the most respected venture capital firms in Silicon Valley. And it hadn't been her father who had facilitated it. It had been her own relentless networking, her flawless pitch, and the undeniable strength of her company's technology. As she worked late into the night, reviewing spreadsheets and responding to emails from her team, Sarah felt a sense of liberation. The hurt from Mark's words was still there, a dull ache in her heart, but it was being overshadowed by a growing sense of purpose. For too long, she had allowed him to define her. She had downplayed her successes, hidden the true scale of her ambition, all in the name of preserving his fragile ego. She had thought that by making herself smaller, she could make their marriage bigger, but she realized now that she had been mistaken. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Amelia. "Everything is in place for tomorrow. The board has approved the final press release. You ready for this?" Sarah smiled. "More than ready," she typed back. "It's time." She looked at a photo on her desk. It was of her and Mark taken on their honeymoon in Tuscany. They were so young, so full of hope. A wave of sadness washed over her. She had loved him, she truly had. But the man in that photo was not the man who had humiliated her tonight. The man in that photo had believed in her, had seen her as an equal. The man she was married to now saw her as an accessory, a reflection of his own success. She knew that what she was about to do would change everything. It would be the end of their marriage as she knew it. It might even be the end of their marriage period. But it would be the beginning of her living her own life on her own terms. She shut her laptop and stood up, stretching her tired limbs. She walked over to the large window that overlooked the manicured lawn of their backyard. The sky was beginning to lighten in the east, the first hint of dawn breaking through the darkness. A new day was coming, and with it, a new world order. Mark thought he was the king of his corporate castle. He had no idea that his queen had just orchestrated a coup, and she had done it all from the quiet sanctuary of her home office while he slept blissfully unaware in the next room. The next morning, the atmosphere in the penthouse boardroom of Sterling and Finch was electric. The air, thick with the scent of expensive coffee and even more expensive cologne, crackled with anticipation. Mark stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the sprawling city below. He felt a familiar thrill, the heady mix of power and adrenaline that came with his high-stakes job. Today was the day he had been working towards for the past 5 years. The CEO of Sterling & Finch, a venerable but stagnating investment firm, had recently retired, and the board had been engaged in a lengthy and secretive process to find his successor. Mark was the front-runner. As the senior vice president of acquisitions, he had been the firm's golden boy, the rainmaker who had brought in a string of lucrative deals. He was young, ambitious, and ruthless, qualities that were highly valued in the cutthroat world of finance. He had schmoozed the board members, wined and dined the key shareholders, and presented a bold vision for the company's future. He was confident that the announcement scheduled for 9 a.m. sharp would be a mere formality. His friend David, also a senior executive at the firm, clapped him on the back. "Ready for your coronation, Your Majesty." He grinned. Mark smoothed down his silk tie, a picture of cool confidence. "It's not over till the fat lady sings David," he said. But his own grin betrayed his excitement. "But I have to admit, I'm looking forward to redecorating the corner office." The other executives in the room offered their congratulations, their faces a mixture of genuine admiration and thinly veiled envy. They all knew Mark was the board's choice. He was the safe bet, the insider who would maintain the status quo while projecting an image of dynamic leadership. At precisely 9 a.m., the boardroom doors opened. The chairman of the board, a stern-faced man in his late 60s named Mr. Abernathy, walked in, followed by the other board members. They took their seats at the long, polished mahogany table. A hush fell over the room. Mr. Abernathy cleared his throat. "Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. As you know, for the past several months, the board has been conducting a thorough search for the next CEO of Sterling & Finch. We have considered a number of highly qualified candidates, both internal and external. It has been a difficult decision, but we are confident that we have chosen a leader who will not only steer this firm through the challenges of the modern market, but will also position us for unprecedented growth." Mark's heart pounded in his chest. This was it. He straightened his tie, a triumphant smile already forming on his lips. "The board has unanimously decided," Mr. Abernathy continued, his gaze sweeping across the room, "that the new Chief Executive Officer of Sterling & Finch will be an individual who has demonstrated extraordinary vision innovation and a remarkable ability to build a successful enterprise from the ground up. This individual represents a bold new direction for our firm, a departure from the old ways of thinking, and a commitment to investing in the future." Mark's smile faltered slightly. This wasn't the preamble he had expected. He had anticipated praise for his deal-making, prowess for his loyalty to the firm. This talk of a bold new direction and a departure from the old ways sounded less like a coronation and more like a revolution. And so Mr. Abernathy said, a dramatic pause, hanging in the air, "It is my great pleasure to introduce you to the new CEO of Sterling & Finch." The boardroom doors opened again, and in walked Sarah. She was not the Sarah that Mark had mocked at dinner last night. She was not the wife in the sensible dress picking at her scallops. This Sarah was a vision of power and authority. She wore a bespoke navy blue power suit that accentuated her tall, slender frame. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek chignon, and her face, though devoid of any visible makeup, radiated a confidence that was almost startling. She walked into the room not with the tentative steps of an intruder, but with the measured, assured stride of a woman who owned it. A collective gasp went through the boardroom. Jaws dropped, eyes widened. Mark felt the blood drain from his face. He stared at his wife, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. It was like a scene from a surrealist film. Sarah. His Sarah. The woman he had called Business Barbie was being introduced as the new CEO of his company. It was impossible. It was ludicrous. She walked to the head of the table and stood next to Mr. Abernathy, her calm, composed gaze sweeping over the stunned faces of the executives. Her eyes met Mark's for a fleeting moment, and in them he saw not a hint of triumph, not a flicker of malice, but a cool, dispassionate assessment that chilled him to the bone. "Good morning," she said, her voice clear and steady, amplified by the room's hidden microphones. "My name is Sarah Jenkins, and I am honored to be your new CEO." The silence in the room was so profound that Mark could hear the frantic, panicked thumping of his own heart. The world had tilted on its axis. The ground had opened up beneath his feet. The woman he had spent the last 7 years underestimating, the woman he had so cruelly belittled just hours before, was now his boss, his new CEO. And as he looked at her standing there in all her unexpected, terrifying glory, he realized that the joke, the real joke, had been on him all along. The shock that had paralyzed the boardroom slowly gave way to a cacophony of whispers and confused murmurs. Mark remained frozen in his spot by the window, his world having shrunk to the impossible figure of his wife standing at the head of the table. It had to be a mistake, a prank, a hallucination, brought on by a combination of ambition and expensive wine. Mr. Abernathy, seemingly oblivious to the seismic shockwave that had just ripped through the room, continued his introduction. "Sarah comes to us from Nexus Innovations, a company she co-founded and built into one of the most disruptive forces in the sustainable technology sector." He gestured towards Sarah, who gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. A presentation flickered to life on the large screen behind them. The Nexus Innovations logo appeared sleek and modern, followed by slides detailing the company's meteoric rise, its patented technology, its exponential revenue growth, its glowing profiles in Forbes and the Wall Street Journal. Mark stared at the numbers, the charts, the headlines. It was all real. The little project, the craft corner, the Business Barbie enterprise, was a multi-million-dollar corporation on the verge of a global breakthrough. "As many of you know," Mr. Abernathy went on, "the board of Sterling and Finch has been looking to diversify our portfolio to move beyond our traditional investments and into the burgeoning green tech market. We've been searching for a company, to acquire a company that would not only bring us into the 21st century, but would become the new cornerstone of our firm." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "We found that company in Nexus Innovations, and as part of the acquisition deal, a deal worth 9 figures, we also acquired its visionary leader." The pieces of the puzzle slammed into place in Mark's mind with the force of a physical blow. The secret board meetings, the vague allusions to a major acquisition, the talk of a new direction. It had all been about this, about her. While he had been posturing and preening confident in his own ascent, the real power play had been happening in the shadows orchestrated by the one person he had never, not for a single moment, considered a player. He remembered her late nights in her office, the hushed phone calls, her frequent business trips that he had dismissed as social getaways with Amelia. He remembered her quiet confidence, her unshakable belief in her little project. It had all been there, right in front of him, but he had been too blinded by his own arrogance to see it. His friend David, his face pale with shock, leaned over to him. "Mark, did you know?" he stammered. Mark couldn't answer. He could only shake his head, a gesture of numb disbelief. No, he hadn't just not known. He had actively, willfully, and publicly denigrated the very thing that had now propelled his wife to the pinnacle of the corporate world, a position he had coveted with every fiber of his being. The irony was so bitter, so savage, it felt like acid in his throat. Sarah began to speak, her voice resonating with an authority that seemed both utterly foreign and yet somehow deeply familiar. She didn't talk about tote bags or community centers. She talked about leveraged buyouts, about market synergy, about the integration of Nexus's R&D with Sterling and Finch's capital resources. She spoke the language of power, the language of his world, but she spoke it with a fluency and a vision that he had never possessed. She laid out a plan for the company's future that was audacious, brilliant, and utterly convincing. The stunned executives who had initially been looking at her with a mixture of confusion and skepticism were now listening with rapt attention. They were seeing what the board had seen, what the venture capitalists had seen, what Mark had failed to see a leader. As she spoke, Mark's mind replayed the scene from the restaurant the night before. His own words, laced with derision and contempt, echoed in his ears. Business Barbie. A cute, expensive hobby. Don't pretend it's a real job. Each word was a fresh stab of humiliation. He felt the eyes of his colleagues on him, their gazes a mixture of pity, amusement, and a dawning, brutal schadenfreude. He had not only been a fool, he had been a loud, obnoxious fool, and he had done it in front of the very people whose respect he craved. The presentation ended. Mr. Abernathy beamed. "Any questions?" One of the older executives, a man who had been a rival of Mark's for years, raised his hand. "Ms. Jenkins," he said, his voice laced with a respect that had been absent just moments before. "Can you elaborate on your plans for the existing leadership team?" It was a loaded question, a polite inquiry into who would be staying and who would be going. Every eye in the room, including Mark's, was now fixed on Sarah. She gave a small, enigmatic smile. "I believe in talent, and I believe in results," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "I will be spending the next few weeks evaluating every department, every portfolio, and every executive. My decisions will be based on performance, not on politics. The future of Sterling and Finch will be built on merit. Anyone who is committed to that vision will have a place on my team." Her gaze, cool and appraising, swept across the room, and for a second it lingered on Mark. In that moment he understood. This wasn't just a corporate takeover. It was a personal one. The woman he had mocked was now his judge, his jury, and quite possibly his executioner. The boardroom, which he had always seen as his arena of triumph, had become his courtroom, and he was the one on trial. The verdict was yet to come, but as he looked at the composed, powerful woman who was his wife, he had a sinking feeling that he had already been found guilty. The rest of the day passed in a surreal haze for Mark. The formal announcement was followed by a series of meetings, each one more excruciating than the last. He had to sit through a town hall where Sarah addressed the entire company, her poise and intelligence winning over a skeptical audience. He had to endure the forced smiles and whispered conversations of his colleagues, their curiosity about his marital implosion barely concealed. He tried to approach Sarah once, catching her in the hallway between meetings. "Sarah, we need to talk," he said, his voice hoarse. She turned to him, her expression unreadable. "My schedule is quite full today, Mr. Davies," she said, using his surname, a formal professional courtesy that felt like a slap in the face. "Please make an appointment with my assistant, and in the future all communications should go through the proper channels." She then turned and walked away, leaving him standing in the hallway, his world crumbling around him. The humiliation was a physical thing, a leaden weight in his stomach. He was no longer Mark Davies, the powerful senior vice president. He was just another employee, another subordinate subject to the whims and dictates of his new CEO, his wife. That evening he went home to a house that felt both familiar and alien. The opulent decor, once a source of pride, now seemed like a hollow mockery of his former life. He half expected Sarah to be there for them to have the screaming match that was surely brewing the confrontation that would clear the air. But she wasn't. The house was empty, silent. A note on the kitchen counter, written in her neat, precise script, informed him that she would be staying at a hotel for the foreseeable future. "It's best for both of us," it read, "and for the company." The next few weeks were a slow, agonizing descent into a new and terrifying reality. Sarah, or rather Ms. Jenkins, as he was forced to call her in the office, was a whirlwind of activity. She moved with a speed and a decisiveness that left the old guard at Sterling and Finch reeling. She restructured departments, slashed redundant projects, and brought in her own team from Nexus Innovations, a group of bright, young, and fiercely loyal executives who looked at her with a reverence that bordered on worship. Mark watched from the sidelines, his own power and influence diminishing with each passing day. His projects were scrutinized, his reports were questioned, and his authority was undermined at every turn. He was invited to meetings, but rarely asked for his opinion. He was a ghost in the corporate machine he had once helped to build. The cruelty of his situation was not lost on him. Sarah wasn't overtly hostile. She didn't fire him as he had half expected her to. Instead, she subjected him to a far more exquisite form of torture, the slow public erosion of his professional identity. She was killing him with 1,000 paper cuts, each one a subtle but painful reminder of his new diminished status. One afternoon, he was summoned to her office. It was the corner office he had so arrogantly coveted, now redecorated in a minimalist style that was a stark contrast to the old-world opulence of the previous CEO. Sarah was sitting behind a large glass desk, reviewing a document on her computer. She didn't look up when he entered. "You wanted to see me, Ms. Jenkins?" he asked, his voice stiff. "Yes, Mark," she said, finally looking up. The use of his first name was a surprise, a small crack in the professional facade she had so carefully constructed. "I've been reviewing the firm's portfolio. I'm concerned about the Kensington Deal." The Kensington Deal was his baby, a complex acquisition he had spent months putting together. It was supposed to be his crowning achievement, the deal that would secure his promotion to CEO. "There's nothing to be concerned about," he said defensively. "It's a solid deal." "Is it?" she asked, her voice deceptively mild. She swiveled her monitor around to face him. On the screen was a detailed analysis of the deal with rows of figures and charts. "Because my team has found some irregularities. It seems the due diligence was not as thorough as it should have been. The company we're acquiring has some significant undisclosed liabilities. If we had gone through with this deal as it stands, Sterling and Finch would have lost millions." Mark stared at the screen, his face turning ashen. She was right. He had been so eager to close the deal, so focused on the glory, that he had cut corners, overlooked red flags. He had been sloppy. I can fix this," he stammered. No, you can't, she said, her voice turning cold. Because I already have. I've renegotiated the terms, restructured the deal, and saved this firm from your incompetence. She swiveled the monitor back around. And that brings me to my next point. Your performance, Mark. It's been subpar. Your recent deals have been lackluster. Your reports are late, and frankly, you seem distracted. He wanted to scream, to rage, to tell her that the reason he was distracted was because his entire life had been upended by her Machiavellian machinations. But he couldn't. He was trapped. Effective immediately, she continued, her voice devoid of any emotion. I am reassigning you. You will no longer be the Senior Vice President of Acquisitions. Your new title will be Vice President of Special Projects. It was a demotion, a public shaming. Special Projects was corporate Siberia, a meaningless title given to executives who were being put out to pasture. You can't do this, he said, his voice a desperate whisper. I can, she said, her eyes like chips of ice. And I have. Your new office is on the 12th floor. Please have your belongings cleared out of your current office by the end of the day. She then turned her attention back to her computer, a clear dismissal. Mark stood there for a moment, utterly defeated. The woman he had married, the woman he had lived with for 7 years, had just professionally and personally annihilated him. And she had done it with the cool, detached efficiency of a surgeon removing a tumor. He walked out of her office in a daze. The walk back to his own office, the one that was no longer his, was the longest walk of his life. He passed his colleagues who averted their gaze, their faces a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. The news of his demotion had already spread through the office grapevine. He sat down at his desk, the desk that had once been his throne, and looked around at the trappings of his former life. The expensive art, the photos of him with powerful people, the awards and accolades. It was all a sham, a monument to a man who had never really existed. He had built his identity on a foundation of arrogance and a sense of entitlement. He had defined his worth by his job title, his salary, his ability to dominate and control. And now, all of that had been stripped away. He was left with nothing but the bitter, humbling truth of his own mediocrity. And the even more bitter truth that the woman he had so foolishly underestimated was in every way that mattered his superior. The new world order had arrived, and he was its first and most prominent casualty. The move to the 12th floor was a swift and brutal confirmation of Mark's fall from grace. His new office was a small, windowless cube, a stark contrast to the expansive suite he had once occupied. The title, Vice President of Special Projects, was, as he had suspected, a euphemism for irrelevant. His days were spent on meaningless tasks, analyzing obscure market trends, and writing reports that he knew no one would ever read. He was a pariah, an object lesson in the new regime's intolerance for mediocrity. The evenings were even worse. The empty house, once a symbol of his success, now felt like a mausoleum. He would wander through the silent rooms, surrounded by the ghosts of a life that was no longer his. He saw Sarah everywhere. In the books she had left behind, in the faint scent of her perfume that still lingered in the air, in the half-empty coffee cup she had left on her bedside table that last morning. One evening, desperate for some semblance of human connection, he called David. His friend's voice was hesitant, guarded. "Mark, how are you?" "How do you think I am, David?" Mark snapped, his voice raw with frustration. "I'm in corporate hell. My wife has taken over my life, and my so-called friends have abandoned me." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Mark, what did you expect?" David finally said, his voice tinged with a weariness that bordered on pity. You treated her like dirt. Not just that night at the restaurant, but for years. We all saw it. We just didn't say anything. So you all just stood by and watched? Mark demanded, a fresh wave of betrayal washing over him. It wasn't our place, David said defensively. And besides, you weren't exactly open to criticism. You were difficult, Mark. You were so caught up in your own success you couldn't see anything else. The conversation ended on a strained note. Mark hung up the phone. The silence of the house pressing in on him. David's words, though harsh, had the uncomfortable ring of truth. Had he really been that blind? That arrogant? He began to sift through the wreckage of his memory, re-examining his marriage, his career, his entire life through the painful new lens of his current reality. He remembered the early days of his relationship with Sarah, her quick wit, her sharp mind, her quiet ambition. He had been drawn to her intelligence, her strength. But somewhere along the way, as his own career had taken off, he had become threatened by it. He had wanted a partner, but he had also wanted to be the star. And so he had unconsciously, and then consciously, begun to diminish her, to box her in, to turn her into the dutiful wife who wouldn't outshine him. He found an old photo album tucked away in a closet. He flipped through the pages, a montage of their life together, their wedding, their travels, their shared smiles. He saw a picture of Sarah on her graduation day from Stanford, her face radiant with pride as she held her MBA diploma. He had been there that day, and he remembered feeling a twinge of something he hadn't been able to name at the time. Now he knew what it was: envy. He had been envious of her brilliance, of her potential. And instead of celebrating it, instead of supporting her as she had supported him, he had tried to extinguish it. The realization was a gut punch, a moment of such profound self-awareness that it left him breathless. He had not just been a fool. He had been a monster, a small, petty, insecure monster who had tried to cage a lioness. A few days later, he received a formal inter-office memo. It was a summons to a meeting in Sarah's office. He walked to the penthouse floor with a sense of dread. He had no idea what to expect. Another demotion. The final merciful blow of his termination. He entered her office. She was standing by the window, looking out at the city, much as he had done on that fateful morning what felt like a lifetime ago. "You wanted to see me?" he asked, his voice subdued. She turned to face him. Her expression was not harsh or cold, as he had expected, but weary. There were dark circles under her eyes, and for the first time since her dramatic return, she looked vulnerable. "I've made a decision, Mark," she said, her voice quiet. "I'm selling Sterling and Finch." He was stunned. "Why you just got here?" "I'm not a corporate raider, Mark," she said, a faint, sad smile playing on her lips. "I'm a builder. I built Nexus from the ground up. I came here to integrate our technologies to create something new. But this place, it's toxic. The culture is rotten to the core. It's all about ego and politics, not innovation. It's your world, Mark, and I want no part of it." She paused, taking a deep breath. "I've received a very generous offer from a larger tech conglomerate. They want Nexus and they're willing to take Sterling and Finch as part of the deal. I'm taking the offer. I'm going back to what I love. I'm going back to building things." She walked over to her desk and picked up a folder. "This is a severance package. It's, generous. More than generous. It will be enough for you to start over." He looked at the folder, then back at her. "Sarah, He didn't know what to say. "I'm sorry," seemed so ridiculously inadequate. "I know," she said, her voice softening. "I know you are." She looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time he saw not his CEO, not his nemesis, but his wife, the woman he had loved and the woman he had lost. "I didn't do this to punish you, Mark," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Not really. I did it because I had to. I had to prove to myself that I could, that I was more than just your wife, more than just a hobbyist. I had to reclaim my own identity." She walked towards the door. "The lawyers will handle the rest. I'm going back to the hotel to pack. I'm leaving tonight." And then she was gone. Mark stood alone in the magnificent corner office, the severance package in his hand. He was free. Free from the job he had come to hate. Free from the daily humiliation. Free from the ghost of his former self. But he had never felt more alone. He looked out the window at the sprawling city below. It was a city of ambition, of power, of reinvention. He had come to this city to conquer it. And in a way he had. He had reached the top only to find that it was a lonely, empty place. He had lost everything that mattered, his job, his friends, his wife. But as he stood there watching the sun set over the concrete jungle, he felt something else, something he hadn't felt in a very long time. A glimmer of hope. He had been stripped of everything, but he was still standing. He was a blank slate. He could be anyone, do anything. He had been given a second chance, a chance to build a new life, a life based not on ego and ambition, but on something real, something true. He didn't know what that life would look like or where it would take him. But as he walked out of the office for the last time, leaving the keys to his gilded cage on the desk, he knew one thing for sure: he would not waste it. The king was dead. It was time to see what the man underneath could become. 6 months later, the name Sterling and Finch was just a memory on Wall Street, absorbed into the behemoth of a tech conglomerate that had acquired it. The world of high finance had moved on its attention, captured by new deals, new dramas. For Mark, however, the world had slowed down. The sale of the company had left him a wealthy man, but the money felt like fool's gold, a consolation prize for a game he had spectacularly lost. He sold the house that monument to a life of hollow ambition and moved into a small, unassuming apartment in a quieter part of the city. He spent his days walking, reading and thinking, really thinking, for the first time in years. He was an archaeologist of his own life, digging through the layers of arrogance and insecurity to find the man he had been before the world of Sterling and Finch had consumed him. He reconnected with his estranged family, his parents and his sister, who had watched his ascent into the corporate stratosphere with a mixture of pride and unease. He apologized to them not just for his neglect, but for the man he had become. They were hesitant at first, but they saw the change in him, the quiet humility that had replaced the brash confidence. Slowly they welcomed him back into the fold. He started volunteering at a local community center, the very kind of place he had once mocked. He taught business skills to young aspiring entrepreneurs, helping them to write business plans, secure micro loans, and navigate the complexities of starting a small enterprise. He found a surprising satisfaction in it, a sense of purpose that his 8-figure deals had never given him. He was not just sharing his knowledge. He was helping people to build their dreams, a role he had so spectacularly failed to play in his own marriage. One afternoon, while browsing a bookstore, he came across a magazine. On the cover was a face he knew better than his own. It was Sarah. The headline read, "Sarah Jenkins, the visionary behind Nexus and the future of sustainable tech." He bought the magazine and read the article, a profile of her life and her work. It detailed the incredible success of Nexus since the sale, its expansion into new markets, its groundbreaking new technologies. The article painted her as a titan of industry, a woman who was changing the world. And it was all true. He felt a pang, not of envy, but of a deep, profound respect. He had been married to this extraordinary woman, and he had been too blind to see her. He was proud of her, genuinely proud. And with that pride came a deep and abiding sense of loss. He knew he had to see her, not to win her back, not to ask for forgiveness, but to tell her what he had learned, to show her the man he was becoming. He found her contact information through a mutual acquaintance and sent her a short, simple email. "I'd like to see you," it read, "to talk, if you're willing." To his surprise, she agreed. They met in a small, quiet cafe, far from the power lunch spots they had once frequented. She looked happy. There was a lightness to her, a sense of peace that had been absent during their tumultuous last days together. He told her everything, about his journey of self-discovery, about his volunteering, about the man he was trying to become. He didn't make excuses for his past behavior. He owned it, every ugly, selfish part of it. She listened patiently, her gaze never leaving his face. When he had finished, she was silent for a long time. "I'm glad you're doing well, Mark," she finally said, her voice soft. "I always knew there was a good man in there somewhere. He just got lost." "He was lost," Mark agreed. "And I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything. For not seeing you, for not supporting you, for not being the man you deserved." She gave him a small, sad smile. "I'm sorry too. I'm sorry I didn't fight for us sooner. I let you diminish me, because I was afraid of what would happen if I didn't." They sat in a comfortable silence, the unspoken history between them, a palpable presence. The hurt was still there, a faint scar on both of their hearts, but it was no longer a raw, open wound. It was a part of their story, a chapter that had closed. "What will you do now?" she asked. "I don't know," he said honestly. "For the first time in my life, I don't have a 5-year plan. I'm just living, taking it one day at a time, trying to build something real." He looked at her, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "And you?" "I'm going to keep building," she said, her eyes shining with that familiar passion. "I'm going to keep changing the world." They finished their coffee and walked out of the cafe into the late afternoon sun. They said their goodbyes, not as husband and wife, not as CEO and subordinate, but as two people who had shared a life, who had hurt each other deeply, and who had, in the end, found a measure of peace. As he watched her walk away, a successful, powerful, and happy woman, Mark felt a sense of closure. He had lost his wife, his job, and his identity. But in the process, he had found something far more valuable, himself. He didn't know what the future held, but he was no longer afraid of it. He was the architect of his own life now, and for the first time, he was excited to see what he would build. The story of Mark and Sarah was over. But the story of Mark Davies, the man, was just beginning. That's the story of how a single dinner, a single moment of casual cruelty, unraveled a man's entire world and unleashed the hidden power of the woman he thought he knew. It's a story about ego ambition and the dangerous game of underestimating the people closest to us. But more than that, it's a story of redemption, of second chances, and of the incredible strength it takes to rebuild a life from the ashes of your own mistakes. He was the dashing mogul every ambitious entrepreneur wanted to emulate. She was the poised, loyal wife who had stood by him from humble beginnings. No one would have guessed that behind the gated mansion's manicured lawns, betrayal festered like poison. Until one day, in a flurry of financial sabotage, he let his mistress cut off his wife's credit cards. It was humiliating, scandalous, and only the beginning of a whirlwind that would pit powerful business alliances against each other. In a boardroom confrontation that stunned everyone, the CEO himself stepped in, but not in the way anyone expected. Buckle up. This is the story of love, greed, and revenge. Jordan Alberts was not born into luxury. He grew up in a cramped one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of Milwaukee, where he learned to hustle by selling candy bars door to door at the age of 10. Over the years, Jordan's unwavering determination and charm propelled him into better circles. First at a local startup, then into his own tech company that caught the eye of an angel investor. By the time he was 35, Jordan was a self-made millionaire, a prominent figure on various entrepreneurial boards, and had connections with people like Mark Cuban, Bill Gates, and a few top executives at Google. His wife, Elizabeth Alberts née Wagner, had been with him through everything. They met in college at a small tech entrepreneur club meeting, both bright-eyed and dreaming of changing the world. Elizabeth came from a modest background, too. Her father was a retired auto mechanic, and her mother a homemaker. She'd studied communications with an emphasis on public relations, and it was through Elizabeth's network of contacts that Jordan first gained access to small local pitch events. While Jordan pitched his innovative software for automating small business tasks, Elizabeth made calls, arranged coffee meetups, and tried to capture the interest of potential backers. They married in a little chapel by Lake Michigan. It wasn't a lavish wedding, no star-studded guest list, no fancy reception at the Ritz. But to Jordan and Elizabeth, it felt perfect. A union built on genuine love, unwavering support, and a shared dream of building a life and a business empire together. Over the next decade, they grew from a modest condominium in Milwaukee to a stunning estate in Austin near Lake Travis, with a sweeping view of the water and rolling Texas hills. It was there at a philanthropic event organized by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation that Jordan's name landed on the radar of top-level investors. His company's smart automation technology was recognized for its potential to transform not just small businesses, but large-scale manufacturing and logistics. Soon after, Jordan's net worth skyrocketed from a mere $5 million to well over $200 million. For a while, everything was picture perfect. The marriage was strong, their personal synergy unwavering. Elizabeth handled some philanthropic duties, organizing events, acting as a goodwill ambassador for Jordan's brand, and forging new partnerships through her PR background. Their household staff adored them, describing Elizabeth as kind, gracious, and always mindful of the people around her. But money can be a seductive force, and success can open doors to darker temptations. Jordan began attending more exclusive networking events in Beverly Hills, New York, and beyond. Elizabeth was often at his side, but there were times she couldn't attend. Perhaps she was busy finalizing the details for a charity gala, or maybe she was simply burnt out from the unrelenting schedule. It was during these times, rare at first, then increasingly common, that Jordan got close to someone else. Her name was Ava Monroe. She was a rising star in the world of technology law, representing high-profile clients like Tesla, Amazon, and a few top-tier cryptocurrency exchanges. She had a reputation for being ruthless in negotiations, seductive in social gatherings, and unbelievably charming behind closed doors. The rumor mill started buzzing the moment Ava was seen at Jordan's table during a private dinner after a tech summit in Las Vegas. Elizabeth wasn't there. She had chosen to stay in Austin, meeting with a team of female entrepreneurs Jordan was mentoring. A few people whispered about Jordan's visible fascination with Ava, the way he leaned in whenever she spoke, how they clinked champagne flutes with an intimacy that suggested more than just business talk. No one knew for certain how fast or how deep it went, but soon the signs became undeniable. Lavish gifts appeared on Ava's social media, including a diamond bracelet, suspiciously similar to the ones Jordan's company had once gifted important clients. Photos emerged of Jordan and Ava at high-end restaurants in Manhattan, always carefully angled to obscure Jordan's face, though keen observers could still identify him by the sliver of a recognizable watch or the faint reflection in a mirrored wall. By the time the rumors reached Elizabeth, they were no longer rumors, but near-confirmed facts. She felt her chest tighten, her world spinning out of control. This couldn't be real. Jordan had always been a loyal partner. But the evidence was too compelling to deny. She confronted him in the privacy of their Lakeview mansion. At first, Jordan denied everything. Yet denial quickly turned into a half-hearted admission once Elizabeth presented him with photographic evidence, like a skilled negotiator used to controlling deals. Jordan tried to manipulate the situation, insisting that Ava was just a business associate, someone he occasionally had dinner with. But Elizabeth saw right through it. She had always been adept at reading him. A chill settled over their once loving home. Elizabeth, determined to preserve her dignity, demanded they enter marriage counseling, or at the very least step away from high-profile events until they resolved their issues in private. Jordan nodded, providing non-committal answers. He had never liked therapy, never seen the point in discussing feelings with a stranger. He agreed to her wishes on the surface, yet beneath the facade, he continued his involvement with Ava, allowing the illicit relationship to take root. This was the calm before the storm. For soon Elizabeth's sense of betrayal would pale in comparison to the massive financial and emotional blow about to come her way. Weeks passed. Elizabeth tried to focus on her philanthropic work and personal projects, attempting to distract herself from the growing chasm between her and Jordan. When a local charity she sponsored invited her to discuss future donations, Elizabeth discovered something shocking. Her personal credit card was declined. Embarrassment washed over her in front of the unsuspecting staff. She tried another card. Sure, it must have been a glitch, but that too was declined. The staff politely suggested she call her bank, and Elizabeth excused herself with a polite smile, her hands trembling as she left the office. Elizabeth called the bank suspecting fraud or an administrative error. But the bank's representative informed her that both cards had been cancelled the previous week. Under their joint account, they were tied to Jordan's finances, and evidently Jordan had authorized the cancellation. It felt like a punch to the gut. Why on earth would Jordan cancel her cards without her knowledge or consent? They had never had major financial disputes. Elizabeth always had access to family funds, albeit responsibly. She dialed Jordan, but the call went straight to voicemail. She sent him several frantic texts. No response. Later that evening, Jordan came home exuding an air of tired disinterest. Elizabeth confronted him the moment he walked through the door. Under the chandelier's glow, which reflected in her tear-filled eyes, Jordan brushed aside her questions with a dismissive wave. "I needed to consolidate our finances," he said, removing his blazer. "You can use the joint checking account for a while." "No big deal, no big deal." Elizabeth's frustration swelled. "You cancelled my credit cards without even telling me what's going on. Are you punishing me for something?" Jordan's eyes flicked away nervously. And that was when Elizabeth realized he was lying again. The next words that came from his mouth were not only shocking, but also laced with a cruelty she never imagined he was capable of. Ava suggested we revisit some of my expenses. She found that you were spending frivolously. It made sense to limit credit usage. Elizabeth's heart dropped to her stomach. Ava. That woman was now meddling in their finances. As if the affair wasn't enough, Jordan had allowed this mistress to encroach into an arena that Elizabeth believed was sacred, her own household stability. What is Ava doing reviewing my spending? Since when does your fling get to decide what is or isn't frivolous? Elizabeth spat tears, threatening to spill. Jordan made an attempt at a calming gesture, but his words only fanned the flames. She's helping me restructure. Her firm has great insights into corporate finances. This is about the business, Elizabeth. It's not personal. Not personal. Elizabeth recalled how intimately personal their marriage had always been. They built every aspect of their lives together, from small decisions about wallpaper colors to big entrepreneurial leaps that demanded everything from both of them. Now Jordan was shutting her out, consulting Ava instead. In a quavering voice, Elizabeth demanded, "Reinstate my cards. I am your wife. I have a right to our finances, and you know I've never been irresponsible with money." Jordan's face hardened with a new arrogance. "Not until we finalize our restructure," he said, referring to some nebulous plan Elizabeth knew little about. "I'll handle everything in the meantime." That moment, that cold exchange, was a harbinger of the bigger heartbreak to come. If Jordan was letting Ava control such details, what other aspects of their marriage was he willing to let her sabotage? As the days turned into weeks, Elizabeth discovered one more blow after another. The monthly allowance she used to cover household expenses had been slashed without explanation. The staff, including her personal assistant, was laid off. Bills began piling up, addressed to her name, but with no means to pay them aside from groveling at Jordan's feet. Friends and family started to notice. Elizabeth tried to hide her shame. She confided in her sister Caroline, who was enraged at Jordan. "This is financial abuse," Caroline insisted. "You should speak to a lawyer." Elizabeth shuddered at the thought. She still believed they could salvage their relationship, that Jordan would snap out of whatever daze Ava had put him in. Yet a small part of her whispered that maybe Caroline was right. Then came a fateful meeting at a hotel conference suite in Los Angeles, one that Jordan had insisted Elizabeth attend. It was a gathering of major tech moguls, including Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, who were rumored to be there to discuss new tech innovations in global logistics. When Elizabeth arrived, she quickly realized something was off. She saw Jordan in the lounge area, standing far too close to Ava, exchanging hushed conversations. Seeing Elizabeth from a distance, Jordan slipped away discreetly, leaving Ava behind. Elizabeth approached her husband with a forced smile. "I'm here," she said, desperate to maintain composure. "What's the plan?" Jordan gave a curt nod. "There's a closed-door session for the key players only. You'll have to wait outside." In the past, Elizabeth had always been included in these key player sessions as Jordan's partner and PR advisor. The subtle exclusion burned her pride. She swallowed her anger. "Sure, I can wait." After hours of waiting, she found Jordan and Ava laughing together near the bar. As she approached, Jordan's phone buzzed, and he stepped away. That was when Ava turned a chilling smirk on her face. "You know Jordan's a visionary," Ava said, swirling the wine in her glass. "He needs someone who can keep up with him on all levels: business, ambition, excitement." Elizabeth felt her face flush with anger. "I've been by his side for years. We built this together." Ava gave a theatrical shrug. Maybe in the past. But times change. People evolve. I guess you were too comfortable. Elizabeth clenched her fists, biting back a retort. She was determined not to make a scene in front of such influential people. But oh, how she wanted to lash out to expose Ava for the home wrecker she was. Ava flicked her hair behind her shoulder, noticing Elizabeth's agitation. "Things will be better if you accept it," she cooed, as if offering advice to a friend. Jordan's moved on in more ways than one. The finances are just the beginning. Elizabeth's body went cold. She realized in that moment how truly precarious her situation was. Ava was not simply a fling. She was positioning herself as a partner in Jordan's professional and personal life. The credit cards were just one step in what looked like a systematic campaign to push Elizabeth out of everything she and Jordan had built. Still, Elizabeth refused to crumble. She left the event quietly, but her mind churned with rage and heartbreak. It was time for her to take action. She needed to protect herself, her assets, and her dignity. Little did she know that as she plotted her next move, Jordan and Ava were preparing a financial ambush that would push her to the brink. Only fate and an unexpected intervention by a certain CEO would alter the course of their twisted game. In the days after the Los Angeles conference, Elizabeth attempted to consult with attorneys. She picked up a referral from a friend who once worked with a high-profile divorce lawyer in New York. The initial phone calls were sobering, with Jordan's empire being primarily under his name and her credit cards cancelled. She had limited liquidity to hire top-tier representation. Even so, Elizabeth pressed forward. She managed to scrape together some funds from a personal savings account. Jordan had no access to money she had set aside from her early PR consulting days. It wasn't a large sum, but enough to secure a preliminary consultation. During that consultation, her lawyer, Michelle Liu, a bright and empathetic but hard-hitting attorney based in Houston, laid out the hard truth. Financial abuse and infidelity are serious grounds for divorce, Michelle said, scanning through Elizabeth's financial statements. But if Jordan's funneling money and assets into new accounts under his own name, or shifting resources to places you can't see, we need proof, and we need it fast. Elizabeth swallowed. She recounted Ava's involvement, how she was effectively orchestrating the restructuring. Michelle's pen scribbled quickly over a notepad. "You have a right to half of the marital assets, Elizabeth, but it looks like your husband is 2 steps ahead. We must move quickly." The plan was to gather evidence of Jordan's wrongdoing and file a court order to freeze marital assets, ensuring Elizabeth had a fair shot. But as they began drafting documents and rummaging through what records, Elizabeth had an avalanche of shocking details surfaced. Jordan wasn't merely cancelling credit cards. He was transferring stocks from their joint portfolio into an account under his newly formed trust. He had changed the authorized signatory details for a few of their properties, effectively locking Elizabeth out. He was also taking out lines of credit against certain properties, presumably to fund new ventures that, as Elizabeth suspected, involved Ava. The emotional strain weighed heavily on Elizabeth. She couldn't sleep, her appetite waned. Each day felt like standing at the center of a storm. Yet if she thought this was the worst of it, she was mistaken. One evening, after finalizing some documents with Michelle, Elizabeth returned to her mansion to find her key card didn't work on the electronic locks. Pounding on the door, she shouted for the live-in staff if any were left. Seconds later, the door opened slightly, revealing Ava's face. "Jordan's not here," Ava said icily. "You should call next time." Elizabeth's heart hammered. This is my home. Get out of my way, she demanded, trying to push past. But Ava slid in front of her, refusing to budge. He told me you're not welcome here anymore until the legal mess is settled. Ava sneered. I have every right to ask you to leave. Elizabeth was trembling with fury. You have no rights here. You're the mistress, not the wife. With a cold laugh, Ava stepped aside and pointed at Elizabeth's luggage haphazardly placed in the foyer. Jordan left these for you, she said. He said to pack whatever else you need and let security escort you out if you refuse to leave. Elizabeth blinked away tears, her throat raw with outrage. She was being thrown out of her own home by the woman who had intruded into her marriage. That moment was a cruel epiphany. Jordan had not only cut off her finances, but now he was physically pushing her out of the place she had shared with him for years. Yet in all that darkness, a sliver of light emerged the next morning. Elizabeth received a phone call from a close mutual friend, Marcus O'Donnell, who worked with Jordan at a large tech conglomerate in Dallas. Marcus was someone Elizabeth trusted, an executive who had known Jordan since the early days. He had seen them build the company from the ground up. Elizabeth Marcus said, his tone urgent. I don't know everything that's going on, but I heard from your staff that you've been locked out. There's a board meeting next week. Jordan wants to finalize some big decisions. If you can get to that meeting and talk to the chairman, maybe you can find some leverage. Elizabeth's breath caught in her chest. The chairman of this particular conglomerate was none other than famed CEO David Hartridge, known not just for his visionary leadership, but also for a strict code of ethics. Over the years, Hartridge had invested heavily in Jordan's business. He was the reason Jordan sat on that board. He's not the type to meddle in personal affairs, Marcus warned. But if Jordan's pulling stunts that compromise your share in the company, Hartridge might step in. He's big on fairness and hates scandal. It was the glimmer of hope Elizabeth needed. She thanked Marcus profusely. The plan was simple. Attend the board meeting, confront Jordan in front of Hartridge, and present enough evidence of Jordan's wrongdoing to ensure the board and possibly the entire conglomerate would not stand for it. She spent the week gathering documents, bank statements, and text message screenshots that implicated Jordan in unscrupulous financial moves. Michelle Liu helped compile everything into a neat folder. You need to be prepared for Jordan to lash out, Michelle warned. He'll try to discredit you in front of the board. Elizabeth nodded her determination, overshadowing her fear. She practiced her speech, reciting it in the mirror of her modest hotel room, where she had temporarily moved. Heart pounding, she told herself that if there was ever a time to fight, it was now. Finally, the day of the board meeting arrived. Elizabeth dressed in a sleek black pantsuit that radiated confidence. She walked into the corporate skyscraper in downtown Dallas, her chin held high despite the knot in her stomach. She spotted Jordan in the corridor, flanked by Ava and a couple of the board members. As soon as he saw Elizabeth, his expression darkened. You're not supposed to be here, Jordan said, trying to keep his voice low. Elizabeth raised her chin. I'm still an investor in your company. I hold shares. So yes, I'm attending the board meeting. Ava stepped in with a condescending smile. Don't make a scene, Elizabeth. This meeting is for serious stakeholders. I am a serious stakeholder, Elizabeth retorted, voice steady. I'm your wife, still legally, and I'm half of this empire's foundation. Behind them, a tall figure approached CEO David Hartridge himself, a man in his 50s with graying temples and a firm handshake. He regarded Elizabeth with polite curiosity. Ms. Alberts, I presume? Elizabeth nodded, handing over her invitation papers and a letter from her attorney, which stated that she possessed partial shares. Hartridge studied the documents, then gave a curt nod indicating she was allowed to attend. Jordan shot Elizabeth a glare that spoke volumes. You have no idea what you're getting into. But Elizabeth did. She was here to preserve her dignity, her livelihood, and the legacy she had helped build. The meeting commenced in a sleek conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Dallas skyline. The board members sat around a large mahogany table, exchanging pleasantries about the upcoming quarter's projections. Jordan made a short presentation on a new partnership with a logistics firm, highlighting expansions and new contracts. A few board members clapped. Then came time for open discussion. Elizabeth raised her hand, clearing her throat. I'd like to address some concerns about the financial structuring Jordan is proposing. She began, her voice reverberating across the silent room. Jordan's face reddened. Ava, seated beside him, tried to intervene. We should keep personal matters out of board discussions, she said. But Elizabeth pressed on, raising the folder of evidence. These changes aren't just personal, Elizabeth said. They could affect company stability. Jordan is funneling resources into a new trust making questionable decisions without transparency. I have documents signed by him with references to Ms. Ava Monroe demonstrating a conflict of interest that could potentially compromise investor trust. A hush fell over the room. Hartridge's brow creased. Jordan, is this true? Jordan stood, scrambling for composure. This is a personal matter. Elizabeth is overstepping her bounds. She's not. Hartridge replied, his voice sharp. If there's a conflict of interest that threatens the stability of our partnership, it's very much a board matter. Jordan's eyes darted between Hartridge and Elizabeth. For the first time, he seemed cornered, uncertain how to proceed. Ava shot Elizabeth a lethal glare, realizing that Elizabeth's boldness had forced the topic into official territory. The tension was palpable. Elizabeth's heart thumped so loudly, she was certain everyone could hear it. But she stood her ground. Continuing. I also discovered lines of credit being taken against marital properties to fund expansions. These expansions could be legitimate, but the details are obscured. I have reason to believe Ms. Monroe is manipulating these finances for her personal gain. Murmurs rippled through the board. A couple members exchanged uneasy glances. Even those who might have sided with Jordan seemed rattled by the magnitude of Elizabeth's accusations. Hartridge steepled his fingers, evaluating the situation. I propose we recess for 15 minutes. Jordan, Elizabeth, Ms. Monroe, please step into my office. Jordan inhaled frustration etched across his features, but he couldn't refuse the CEO's request, not without causing a catastrophic scene. The three followed Hartridge into a glass-walled corner office, shutting the door behind them. In that tense, enclosed space, the real battle began. Elizabeth laid out her evidence on the polished table before Hartridge. Jordan tried to dismiss it all as a personal dispute, but Hartridge was no fool. He could see the potential for scandal, especially if a partner was using company infrastructure for personal vendettas. Throughout this heated exchange, Ava attempted to deflect blame. She portrayed herself as a legal advisor, merely suggesting financial moves, disclaiming any wrongdoing. But Elizabeth's carefully compiled documents suggested otherwise. Emails, text messages, and proposed legal documents bore Ava's digital fingerprints. Hartridge's expression darkened. Jordan, this is unacceptable. If these documents are authentic, you've put your personal entanglements ahead of corporate responsibility. I won't allow it under my leadership. Jordan's face went pale. He tried to protest, to label Elizabeth's claims as overblown, but Hartridge had already made up his mind. "Until this is sorted out, Jordan, I'm placing your proposals on hold. We can't move forward with any major financial changes if they're under this sort of ethical cloud." Elizabeth felt a surge of relief, a faint vindication. While she hadn't resolved the core issue of Jordan's betrayal, at least the board wasn't letting him run roughshod over her financial future. But Jordan, cornered and embarrassed, lashed out in desperation. "You can't shut me down like this," he snapped at Hartridge, voice tight with anger. "I'm the one who made that original deal with your conglomerate. You need my innovation." Hartridge stood up, bristling at Jordan's tone. "I'm the CEO, and you've just made me question your reliability and integrity. Watch yourself, Jordan." Ava stepped closer to Jordan, placing a hand on his arm to calm him, but he shrugged her off. "You'll regret this," he warned Hartridge, then turned to Elizabeth. "And you made a fool of me in front of everyone." Elizabeth clenched her fists, refusing to cower. "You did that to yourself," she said, voice trembling with both fear and resolve. Jordan stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Ava followed quickly, her heels clicking on the marble floor. Hartridge sighed, looking at Elizabeth, who was holding back tears. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention," Hartridge said. "I'm sorry about your personal struggles, but I have to protect the board's interests. If you need anything, contact my office. I'm not a family court judge, but I won't let Jordan drag the company down." With that, Elizabeth let out a shaky breath. She had achieved a small but crucial victory, yet she couldn't shake the nagging sense that Jordan, humiliated and cornered, was far from finished. She left the skyscraper, stepping out into the bright Dallas sun, uncertain, but determined. Little did she know this chapter was only the start of a far more explosive confrontation, one that would involve security teams, sudden betrayals, and a twist that would bring Jordan himself to his knees. Life outside the mansion was lonely, but Elizabeth was thankful for the reprieve from Ava's manipulations. She rented a small apartment near downtown Austin and used what funds she had left to secure her basic needs, while Michelle continued to press for a financial freeze on Jordan's assets. In the weeks following the tense board meeting, Jordan went surprisingly quiet. No more legal letters arrived. No more credit lines were sabotaged. He didn't attempt to contact Elizabeth, nor did Ava. Instead, it seemed as though they had retreated into some silent fortress, likely strategizing their next move. Elizabeth took advantage of the lull. She reconnected with old friends and mentors, explaining partially at least what she was going through. While many were shocked, they offered support in the form of references, moral encouragement, and occasional leads for a stable job or a business partnership. Despite the heartbreak, Elizabeth discovered a renewed sense of purpose. She wasn't just a passive bystander in Jordan's world. She had her own capabilities, her own strengths. Slowly, she started consulting for small tech firms, using her communications and PR background to help them craft compelling pitches. It wasn't a fortune, but it was honest work that reminded her she could stand on her own 2 feet. Then one evening, she received a phone call from an unknown number. A crisp, professional voice greeted her. "Hello, Elizabeth. This is Patricia Carlson. I'm an executive assistant at Tesla, working under Elon Musk's leadership team." Elizabeth's heart thudded. She had met Patricia briefly at a tech conference in Berlin 2 years ago, but they'd never exchanged more than pleasantries. "How can I help you?" Elizabeth asked, mind racing. Patricia hesitated. "I might have information relevant to your predicament with Jordan. Let's just say some of our legal divisions have been observing Ava Munro for a while, and some red flags have come up. Red flags. Elizabeth's curiosity flared. You're investigating her? A slow exhale from the other end. Our major concern is that she's potentially engaged in insider trading, or at least something that veers close to it. She's been known to manipulate powerful men to gain inside info on deals, especially around new technologies. We don't have direct evidence, but we do know that she's heavily involved in your husband's finances. We suspect she might be siphoning resources for her own agendas. Elizabeth's mind reeled. This was bigger than a domestic spat. Ava might be leveraging Jordan's resources and connections to stake her own claims in the tech world. That explained the sudden shifts in finances, the new trust accounts, and the lines of credit. Patricia continued. We want to bring her down, but we need more information. You, Elizabeth, might be in a unique position to gather that. Elizabeth tapped her fingers on the kitchen counter. Isn't that something your legal team handles? A rueful laugh. Yes, but we need Jordan's direct involvement. We suspect he's unwittingly giving her access to confidential materials through corporate crossovers or joint ventures. If you can help us prove it, we can kill two birds with one stone, protect Tesla's proprietary data, and help you gain leverage in your divorce. Elizabeth considered the offer. It was risky. If Ava was truly up to something illegal, Elizabeth could expose herself to potential backlash, but the lure of finally getting the upper hand was strong. I'll do what I can, Elizabeth replied cautiously. But how do I communicate with you about this? Patricia gave her a secure email address and instructions on how to encrypt files. And one more thing, Patricia said, before hanging up. People like Ava are cunning. She'll anticipate your every move. Don't trust phone lines or any device that Jordan has access to. Be careful. Elizabeth thanked her and ended the call. Adrenaline coursing through her. For the next few days, she scoured her digital archives for anything that might hint at insider information. Jordan's old messages about collaborations with major tech companies like Tesla or Amazon, documents that Ava might have manipulated anything that showed a trail of questionable activity. She found a few suspicious threads, forwarded emails from Jordan's corporate account that were CC'd to Ava's personal address. Attachments relating to Tesla's Project Next Gen battery were among them, though none of this was strictly proof of wrongdoing yet. Elizabeth compiled what she could and sent them to the secure email Patricia provided. In response, Patricia confirmed that these were valuable leads, but incomplete. Keep digging, she urged, and let me know if you get direct evidence of deals or monetary gains tied to these inside details. Meanwhile, Michelle Elizabeth's lawyer was preparing for a preliminary hearing to freeze some of Jordan's assets. She insisted Elizabeth come to court to testify about the financial abuse and the suspicious activities they had uncovered. But Jordan's side surprised them by agreeing to a partial freeze without argument. That's strange, Michelle said, tapping a pen against the conference table. Why would he agree so easily? Elizabeth shrugged, perplexed. Maybe he realizes fighting me will look bad in front of the board. But Michelle wasn't convinced. I suspect he's preparing a bigger move. Be vigilant. He may have more leverage than we know. The next morning, Elizabeth received an unsolicited text from Jordan. We need to talk, face to face. She felt a swirl of conflicting emotions, anger, sorrow, curiosity. But she knew she had to tread carefully. She agreed to meet him in a public place, a cafe near the courthouse, where she could keep the upper hand. When Jordan arrived, he looked tired, as though the weight of his troubles had worn him down. He offered a half-smile, which Elizabeth did not return. "Liz?" He began using the old nickname he once uttered, with affection. Things got out of hand. She crossed her arms. "You think—" He sighed, scanning her face for warmth that was no longer there. "I want to settle this amicably. We can discuss spousal support, property divisions, everything. No need for a long, nasty court battle." Elizabeth let the silence hover. She wasn't naive enough to believe him at face value. "Amicably? Are you telling me Ava is out of the picture?" Jordan's shoulders tensed. "This is about you and me, not her. Look, maybe I got carried away with Ava's advice. She's a brilliant attorney." "She's manipulative," Elizabeth cut in sharply. He brushed the point aside. "Regardless, I'm willing to compromise, but I need you to lay off this insider trading nonsense. It's reckless. You're endangering my reputation." Elizabeth realized then that Jordan knew she'd been snooping into his communications. Perhaps Tesla's legal inquiries had begun reverberating in his circle. She saw the fear in his eyes. He was worried, if not about losing her, then about losing his empire. "You made me the enemy," Elizabeth replied, in a hushed, trembling tone. "When you let your mistress cut off my cards and throw me out of my home." Jordan looked away, shame flickering on his face. "I didn't handle that well. But you have to understand the pressure I'm under with these deals." She waited, letting him squirm. Then he continued. "You'll get a fair share. I promise. I just need you to stop meddling in my professional affairs, especially with Tesla or any other major collaborators. You'll ruin me if you do." A bitter laugh escaped Elizabeth. She thought of all the times she had stood beside him, protecting him, representing him before powerful players, forging alliances that were crucial to his success. Now he was pleading for her, not to ruin him. The irony nearly choked her. Before she could respond, Jordan's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and muttered a soft curse. "I have to go," he said, throwing some cash on the table for their untouched coffees. Elizabeth watched him leave a mixture of pity and disdain swirling in her stomach. It was obvious he was desperate, but was this a genuine attempt at reconciliation, or a ploy to keep her from uncovering more incriminating information about Ava? That question lingered as she returned to her apartment, drained. However, a new email from Patricia waited in her inbox. It contained an attachment, a partial timeline of suspicious trades linked to accounts rumored to be controlled by Ava Monroe. There were large bets placed on Tesla's stock ahead of public announcements. Gains in the tens of millions. This is huge, Elizabeth thought. If she connected these trades to emails or calls between Jordan and Ava, it could be the smoking gun. And while Elizabeth had no intention of going to the feds on her own, Tesla's legal team could bury Ava, and by extension, Jordan's complicity, if he was involved. Elizabeth clutched her phone, anxiety coursing through her. She was walking a razor's edge. One false step, and Jordan might retaliate more fiercely, or Ava might strike. But a successful strike against Ava could free Elizabeth from this entire ordeal, giving her the leverage to secure a fair divorce settlement, or even land Jordan in deeper trouble, depending on his role. She reached for her phone to text Patricia when it buzzed in her hand. A call from an unknown number again. Tentatively, Elizabeth answered. A man's voice greeted her calm and steady. "Hello, Ms. Alberts. My name is Gregory Shaw. I'm part of CEO David Hartridge's legal counsel. He asked me to follow up regarding the situation with your husband. Elizabeth's heart skipped. Hartridge's legal counsel. We understand from Mr. Hartridge's conversation with you that there might be unethical or even illegal behavior in play. Gregory continued. The board is concerned about potential liability if Jordan's personal dealings spill into our corporate structure. We can't risk another scandal. Mr. Hartridge would like to assist you discreetly. Elizabeth exhaled slowly. She was on the cusp of powerful alliances forming against Jordan and Ava, but the more people got involved, the more dangerous it felt. Gregory concluded, We'll be in touch with your lawyer. If you have any crucial evidence, Mr. Hartridge suggests you keep it secure. He wants to avoid a public meltdown, but he's prepared to do what's necessary to protect the company's interests, and that includes supporting you in your legal disputes if it comes to that. Hanging up. Elizabeth felt a measure of validation. The cracks in Jordan's seemingly untouchable world were growing. Perhaps justice would prevail. Yet as she prepared to finalize the next round of documents for Michelle, a gnawing worry kept her awake at night. Cornered animals are the most dangerous, and Jordan, though once gentle and loving, had shown he could be ruthless when threatened. She braced herself for the storm that was surely coming. The next time Elizabeth saw Jordan in person, it wasn't by chance or a carefully arranged meeting. It was at the headquarters of Hartridge's conglomerate in Dallas. A sudden emergency board session had been called to address urgent corporate matters, and Elizabeth, having been notified by Gregory Shaw, arrived prepared. She walked into the reception area, her heart pounding with anticipation. Michelle Liu had insisted on accompanying her, but at the last minute she was called to handle a crucial filing. Elizabeth went alone, relying on the moral support from Gregory and the knowledge that Hartridge wanted the truth on record. Jordan was already inside the boardroom with Ava, who paced like a clad tiger. When Elizabeth entered, they both snapped their heads in her direction. Ava's glare could have sliced glass. Jordan's face was inscrutable, tense, angry, but also tinged with fear. Hartridge arrived moments later, trailed by a few board members and legal advisors. He wasted no time in stating the purpose of the meeting. Allegations have come to my attention that Ms. Monroe has been engaging in stock trades leveraging proprietary information from Jordan's company and potentially from our own collaborations. We need to clarify the truth. Now. Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Ava's jaw clenched. This is preposterous, she began. We demand to see your proof. Hartridge nodded to one of his advisors, who distributed printed documents, timelines of suspicious trades tied to accounts flagged by Tesla's legal team, along with correspondences that Elizabeth and Patricia had pieced together. Jordan snatched a packet from the advisor. His eyes swept over the page's color, draining from his face. Ava's lips thinned, and for a moment Elizabeth could see the faintest flicker of panic in her eyes. Hartridge pinned them with a stern gaze. Jordan, you've been a valuable partner. I don't want to see your personal life derail your professional standing, but this is bigger than your marriage. Insider trading is a federal crime, and if Ms. Monroe is using your business resources to pull this off, you're implicated. Ava recovered quickly. She placed a hand on Jordan's arm, her voice smooth. This is a misunderstanding, David. Anyone can align stock trades with corporate announcements. It's called speculation. Elizabeth decided enough was enough. She stood. Speculation is one thing, but forwarding private emails, entire business proposals, and preliminary press releases is not speculation. I've seen the messages. You're literally discussing the best times to execute trades based on announcements that hadn't been made public yet. Ava whirled on Elizabeth. You have no legal standing to claim that. You're just a scorned wife trying to sabotage Jordan and me. Elizabeth's blood boiled. We'll let the evidence speak. There are even time-stamped emails from Jordan's corporate account sent to your personal email, Ms. Monroe, discussing upcoming expansions and product launches. Then trades were executed in your name or trusts linked to you within hours. A hush followed. Jordan's hands shook slightly. He seemed torn between denial and guilt. After all, the evidence was damning. If he denied it outright, he'd appear foolish. But if he admitted his involvement, he risked criminal charges and the wrath of the board. Hartridge leaned forward, his voice firm. Jordan, I need answers. Were you aware of these trades? Jordan stared at the table, words refusing to form. Finally, he managed Ava said it was all above board, that it was just normal investing. Ava let out a short laugh, but it sounded hollow. If you want to scapegoat me, Jordan, think carefully, she warned. We made certain deals in your name as well. Your signatures are on plenty of documents. The entire boardroom seemed to hold its breath. Hartridge addressed one of his legal advisors. Have we sent this to the SEC? Not yet, the advisor responded. We wanted to confront them first. Jordan shot to his feet, panic etched on his face. No need to escalate it. We can handle this internally. If I undo the trades, repay any gains, repay tens of millions of dollars, Hartridge asked. And that would just be the tip of the iceberg if the SEC digs deeper. This is out of our hands if they launch a formal investigation. Elizabeth watched Jordan unravel. This was the man who had once been so composed, so unstoppable. Now he was cornered, sweat beading on his forehead. Ava, too, looked like a wild animal backed into a corner, eyes darting around the room. At that moment, a building security guard appeared at the door, knocking softly. Mr. Hartridge, you asked for security on standby, he announced quietly. Thank you, Hartridge replied, his tone like steel. I believe we might need you. Ava's eyes flitted towards the door, then back to Hartridge. She adopted a pleading tone. David, you know me. I've handled legal matters for some of the biggest players in the industry. I would never do anything to jeopardize your trust. Hartridge's face remained stony. I trusted Jordan, not you. And this evidence suggests you're at the center of a major ethical breach. If you don't have a verifiable explanation for each of these trades and how you obtained insider information, I have no choice but to protect the company from liability. Suddenly, Jordan snapped. Fear twisted into anger, and he pointed a trembling finger at Elizabeth. You did this. You ruined everything because you couldn't handle that I moved on. Elizabeth steadied her breathing, preparing to reply. But Hartridge cut in calm yet firm. Don't blame her for your poor decisions. You let your personal affair become a corporate liability. Something in Jordan cracked. He lunged toward Elizabeth as if to grab her documents or her phone, an irrational move likely spurred by desperation. But he never made contact. In a blink, the security guard stepped forward and intercepted Jordan, gripping his arms. Stand down, sir, the guard said, voice authoritative. Jordan struggled, but the guard was a solid wall of muscle. Ava shrieked. Let him go. This is a private matter. Hartridge shook his head, anger coloring his features. You just attempted to assault someone in my boardroom. Security remove Mr. Alberts from the premises. Jordan's eyes widened in disbelief. You can't do that. I'm on the board. Not anymore, Hartridge said grimly. I can and I will. You're suspended pending an internal investigation. Once that concludes, we'll determine your status. Now go and take Ms. Munro with you. A second guard stepped in, guiding Ava toward the door as she protested threatening lawsuits and defamation claims. But her words rang hollow, overshadowed by the looming spectre of an SEC investigation. Elizabeth stood off to the side, stunned by how quickly it had escalated from a tension-filled meeting to an outright meltdown. As Jordan and Ava were led out, Jordan craned his neck to shout at her, "You'll pay for this, Elizabeth. Don't think you've won." But the threat carried little weight now. In that moment, Elizabeth felt the mixture of triumph and sorrow that comes with toppling a man she once loved. She hadn't wanted to see Jordan destroyed, only to protect herself and the life they had built together. But Jordan's actions and Ava's ambition had forced her hand. Hartridge dismissed the board members, soon after instructing his legal team to cooperate fully with any investigations. He turned to Elizabeth with a sympathetic frown. "I'm sorry you had to endure this, Miss Alberts. I assure you we'll handle it lawfully. Whatever personal or marital disputes remain, I hope you find closure." Elizabeth gave him a small nod. "Thank you. I appreciate your fairness." She gathered her documents and left the skyscraper, the bright Texas sun striking her face as she stepped onto the street. The entire drama replayed in her mind. He let his mistress cut off my cards, but the CEO called security on him. She thought a bitter yet satisfying sense of irony spreading in her chest. She wasn't naive enough to think it was over. Legal battles would continue, depositions would be taken, and the divorce was far from final. But in this pivotal moment, she had taken back her power, standing against the storm that Jordan and Ava had unleashed. And for the first time in months, Elizabeth felt a glimmer of hope that she might in the end be free from their tyranny. In the weeks that followed, word spread like wildfire. News outlets picked up on rumors of insider trading linked to a high-profile tech investor, hinting that a major name was under investigation. It didn't take long for the rumor mill to connect the dots to Jordan Alberts and his mysterious attorney-turned-partner, Ava Munro. Elizabeth watched from the sidelines, inundated with calls and messages from acquaintances, reporters, and sometimes even old college classmates she hadn't spoken to in years. She ignored most of them, preferring to let the legal process unfold without adding fuel to the media frenzy. Jordan, under immense legal and financial pressure, attempted to strike a deal if Elizabeth agreed to keep quiet and not testify against him or Ava. Regarding insider trading, he would give her a generous divorce settlement. The settlement included alimony, a hefty lump sum, and properties that would secure her financial future. However, Elizabeth refused any agreement that required her to lie or withhold the truth if subpoenaed. Nonetheless, she allowed her lawyer Michelle to work out a fair settlement that didn't involve perjury. Eventually, Jordan capitulated, realizing he had to salvage what he could from the marriage and business meltdown. The final settlement granted Elizabeth a significant portion of the assets, the mansion by Lake Travis, ironically, and a sizable share of Jordan's original tech startup. Meanwhile, Ava disappeared from the public eye, her reputation in tatters. Rumors surfaced that she'd fled the country perhaps to avoid legal repercussions, while others suggested she was hiding out in some luxury villa, waiting for the storm to pass. Either way, her days of meddling in Jordan's finances seemed to be over. Elizabeth didn't celebrate Jordan's downfall. She quietly grieved the end of a marriage that had started in love and partnership, yet she also felt relief and a renewed sense of self. She returned to the Lake Travis mansion, deciding whether to keep it or sell. The sweeping views of the water brought back memories, some of which felt like knives to her heart, others that warmed her soul. She began a new chapter in her life, leveraging her PR skills to start a consultancy focused on helping women entrepreneurs navigate both business and personal challenges. She named it Phoenix Rose Consulting, symbolizing rebirth and resilience. To her surprise, she found more joy in championing other women than she ever did, standing behind Jordan at glitzy galas. She kept in touch with Patricia from Tesla, who occasionally updated her on the ongoing investigations. Whether Jordan faced criminal charges depended on further evidence. But at least for Elizabeth, the immediate threat to her assets and well-being had lifted. David Hartridge reached out, once inviting Elizabeth to a dinner with the board, presumably to mend fences. Elizabeth politely declined. She had no desire to relive the tension of board meetings or navigate corporate politics, where her personal life became public fodder. She was grateful for Hartridge's stance, but preferred to build her future away from the chaos. In moments of solitude, Elizabeth reflected on the entire ordeal. She'd once believed that love, loyalty, and shared ambition could conquer anything. Yet she also realized that unchecked power and ego could corrode even the strongest of bonds. Jordan's betrayal had been a painful lesson, but it set her free to discover her own strengths and a life not tethered to someone else's rising star. Yes, heartbreak lingered, and healing was an ongoing process. But Elizabeth found herself waking each day with a sense of purpose. She'd gather with female founders at local co-working spaces, host workshops on media relations, and offer moral support to those feeling overshadowed by bigger players. Each time she saw a spark of confidence ignite in another woman's eyes, she felt her own sense of wholeness return. In time, Elizabeth would finalize the divorce, sign the deeds, and officially start over. A sense of calm settled within her, like the slow, tranquil waves on Lake Travis at dawn. Her story, the humiliating card cancellations, the public meltdown, the mistress's meddling, would become a cautionary tale, one she shared sparingly, only when it might help others. Despite the scars, Elizabeth refused to let bitterness define her. She chose growth empathy, and a belief that with the right support, anyone can rise from the ashes more formidable than before. Just as Elizabeth thought she had reached stable ground, fate tossed her another curveball. A month after the settlement, Michelle called her urgently. "The feds want to depose you," she said. They uncovered new evidence Jordan may be involved in deeper crimes, bribery, money laundering. Ava might have orchestrated a network. Elizabeth's stomach dropped. Jordan never mentioned anything like that. They've found offshore transactions and documents with his signature, Michelle said grimly. 2 days later, Elizabeth sat in a stark federal office, flanked by Michelle and 2 serious agents. They questioned her about Jordan's finances, Ava's role, the card cancellations, and philanthropic events that may have masked backdoor deals. Elizabeth stuck to the facts. She neither speculated nor dramatized. One agent, impressed, said, "You've been very helpful, Ms. Alberts. This case is significant." She left emotionally drained but relieved. She hadn't been dragged down with Jordan, but the storm wasn't over. Whispers followed Jordan was hiding at a secluded ranch, dodging the press. Ava had vanished. More subpoenas were issued. An indictment loomed. Elizabeth stayed focused on her consultancy, channeling stress into helping other women navigate business pitfalls. Her story, once painful, became a symbol of warning and strength. Then came the headlines, "Jordan Alberts, indicted for insider trading, fraud, and obstruction. Ava was named but still missing. The scandal rocked the tech world. Elizabeth issued a single statement. "I'm saddened by Jordan's choices. I've cooperated fully with authorities and continue to rebuild my life." Eventually, Jordan pled guilty to a lesser charge, offering a tearful courtroom apology. Elizabeth watched from home, tears in her eyes, not from triumph, but quiet grief for the man she once loved. Still, she understood consequences had to follow actions. That night, beneath the soft moonlight over Lake Travis, Elizabeth allowed herself one last cry for the past that died and the hope still waiting ahead. Life has a way of testing our fortitude when we least expect it. Elizabeth Alberts began this journey as a devoted wife, only to see her world upended by betrayal and financial sabotage. Yet what she lost in illusions, she gained in unbreakable resilience. Standing up to powerful forces and calling out wrongdoing isn't easy, but it's sometimes the only way to protect your dignity and your future.